Movies sick fucks. You've seen one too many movies.
Nah, Sid, don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
Anyway, I'll jump into this. This is the R Screenplay Horror Screenplay Challenge analysis of the script for Scary Movie, which became Scream by Kevin Williamson. We're all really big fans of that script. My name is Ben Crew.
I'm Matt Layden.
I'm Jonas Engel.
I'm William Griskovich.
So I'm going to go through first how we all came to be big fans of Scream and our first experiences and how that really kind of jump-started a lot of our loves for horror. So Jonas, you're the youngest here. How about you start off with your love for horror and first encountering Scream?
Okay, yeah. So they kind of go together because I watched Scream for the first time right as about when I was getting into the horror genre. I had just seen You're Next, which was one of the first horror movies I watched just like on my own time, just like totally chill. Because when I was way younger, I like had a lot of problems with watching scary stuff, and eventually I decided to just immerse myself in it, which is why I came to love it. But Scream was very early on in watching that stuff. I'd heard it was really good, and I watched it, and it was really good, and I was super entertained by it, and I loved all the meta elements, and it sort of encouraged me to research and understand the context for them. But
yeah, I remember that I saw Scream 4 before I saw Scream, which is very strange. But that was when I was first really getting into. I know that's saw some
Scream 4 is pretty good though. I like
it's not bad. I mean, it makes Scream. It's
3.
Scream 3. Yeah, Scream 3 is not that great.
Scream 4 is my second favorite of the.
I will agree with that, Lee.
I'd probably agree as well. Just being
it's
at 2.
entirely Courtney Cox's haircut in Scream 3 that kills me.
Oh, it's so bad. The bangs are not
well,
working.
I mean, also the plot.
No, I wasn't talking about the plot. So
it's all worth it to hear Patrick Warburton call Dewey Dewdrop.
And when Scream 4 came out was when I was really getting big into horror. And like after that, I immediately just became a disciple of like anything Wes Craven or John Carpenter had done, studying that stuff. And Scream was just a constant, like I was Dewey for like some Halloween thing. I remember I can dig up some embarrassing photo. I wrote some Google Doc that was entirely about like, some killer, girl's a virgin. It was the typical Scream playbook. And I remember my mom finding it and being like, oh, this is, you can't say virgin. You can't, use these words. And I was like, I don't know, 14 or 15 and just getting chewed out for writing basically a Scream fanfic. And I was like, well, I want to write this even more now. So here we are.
I don't remember how old I was, but I first watched it on TV, and it was, in Canada, after a certain time, they don't really edit movies for TV. So all the blood was in it, all the violence, all the swearing. And I thought it was so cool at the time that I'm watching this movie, and it was my go-to R-rated movie that I would watch over and over again. And I didn't get most of the comedy and the meta humor at the time because I was probably too young to understand it. But that didn't stop me from loving it. And I've probably seen it close to 25 to 30 times. I'd put it up there as like my top 5 horror films. And it's definitely done a lot for the genre. And, it deserves all the praise that it gets, I think.
Well said. I can't believe that I'm the one to have watched this at the youngest age because I'm pretty sure I watched it when I was like 6. Wow. It was, I remember, because I'm pretty sure I watched it on AMC because it used to play on AMC all the time with all the other horror movies. And it was probably, I don't know if it was the first horror movie I saw, but I had not seen A Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or like any of the movies they're referencing. And I had no idea what they're talking about, but I liked it because Shaggy was in it.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I watch it at least every year now. And without that movie, I probably would have never tried writing because everything I do is just a ripoff of Scream.
That's how I felt at first. It's like you saw that movie. Everyone has some kind of movie they see as a screenwriter and they say like, well, I want to do that now. Yep. And the influence is so clear, especially in your scripts. You clearly had in your one script Cherry Bomb like a Dewey character.
I literally wrote Dewey and you're like, yeah, you can't have this.
I was like, there's going to be some issues. They're not going to go separate.
Yours.
So I made him what Kevin Williamson wrote Dewey as a jacked bro guy.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting changes we're going to go over, that like all the men in the description for the script are like jacked and very attractive and like your classic, like hunk looking dude. And then there's, the actual movie.
I think all got changed for the better, though.
No
Yeah,
offense to
even
David
Randy
Arquette,
is written
but
as cool in the script, which is not the same in the film.
that was the biggest
Yeah.
thing to me, was that Billy is introduced as a class president type.
Yeah,
how
that's
he's
so
described.
wrong.
Then the actual movie, he's a bad boy, which is definitely a Craven edition, which because he started Johnny Depp's career, he knew what the audience wanted. They wanted the Johnny Depp type character. And still, you go read Letterboxd reviews for the movie, and it's like, oh, is Billy and Stu, are they single? Like they're just hitting on them. And it's like, it had been the classic class president type, that wouldn't have happened. So the script at the time was definitely a change from, what do you guys think about horror in the 90s? Let's go into that first, the years before Scream. That things
Hard for me to even think of.
So after the 80s was the big, slasher boom, no doubt. And then they got into the 90s and it was kind of already stale at that point. So you were having, the death of a lot of those franchises. You were having like Friday the 13th ended, Nightmare on Elm Street ended. The Curse of Michael Myers had just come out, and that one was just an absolute death throw.
Is that 5?
That's 6. And that
6.
one,
That the one
that one has a whole Snyder cut to it too. That has like 3 separate cuts you can find. And none of them are good. No, one of them's a little better. But that's the one with Paul Rudd.
That's my favorite one, Paul
Hey,
Rudd.
he looks exactly the same as he does now.
Yes. And
I've never seen any of the Halloween sequels except for
okay.
H2O.
I was gonna rage on you.
I like H2O a lot. Kevin Williamson.
The funny thing about that is the score for Scream is used in H2O, if you listen to it. And it's because Scream had just come out, and they were going to get John Carpenter to do the score for H2O, and he just said, nah, not really that great. And so they didn't have a score for it, and they just stuck the score for Scream in there because Scream was what was popular. And it's funny that like Scream is a parody of Halloween, and then Halloween H2O came out, and it's kind of a rip on Scream. It has much more snappy dialogue. It has the exact same score. So when Scream, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was written over a short period of time, this first draft, which was actually called Scary Movie.
I think it was written like over a weekend, if I'm remembering correctly as well.
The story is that this was kind of like, Kevin Williamson wrote this as, if this doesn't happen, where's my career, Like he just knew this has got to be the one that breaks me in, or there's not much chance. So I know that like at first it wasn't really being picked up. Everyone's like, well, slashers, it's kind of a dead genre. Have you seen everything else? What's new to bring to the table? And then whenever people started reading it, and it was this new meta take on it. The only meta thing I remember before this was New Nightmare, which was also by Wes Craven.
Oh, yeah.
And that was Freddy Krueger in the real world, hunting down the actress Heather Langenkamp, and from the original movie. And that's a very interesting take. That if that had come out after Scream, you would have said, okay, there's ripping off Scream and doing a meta thing. So,
I've heard a lot of people refer to New Nightmare as Wes Craven's like trial run for Scream.
Basically, it's a good one. I mean,
it's scary too.
Yeah, you can
or
tell.
It scared me.
It's basically, it has the DNA of most of the future meta, like Cabin in the Woods type stuff. You can watch New Nightmare and see the DNA of what became the more popular meta horror movies. So when Scary Movie, the script started to really stand out, the Weinstein Company, the Miramax people, they noticed it and instantly knew this was a vehicle for a classic horror director. And Wes Craven turned it down so many times, and that to me is kind of why he was the best choice for it. And Wes Craven's somebody that, you guys can weigh in this too, I never knew what his trademarks were. Like, I love his movies. People on His Stairs is so good. And I never knew what about him made those movies so good. Like, you can look at John Carpenter and you know what his, tropes are, like what he likes to have in a movie. But I never could know that with Craven, what made him stand out. And from reading the Scream script and then watching, Scream as well, you can tell that he's an action horror director. He just makes those action descriptions in the script so much better. And I think if you guys go and watch, Nightmare on Elm Street or People on the Stairs, you'll see the action is just so good in those.
I think a lot of that could come from his background as an exploitation filmmaker, because
no
a lot
doubt.
of those films are driven very strongly by the action sequences. And so you can sort of see how that came through his chronology and then ended up with how he changed everything in Scream.
There's a rumor he worked in porn before he became like a big director. That he was like just kind of an exploitation because he did Last House on the Left, and he has like worked in that kind of like deep throat type industry. So
I thought he
Can you
did. I
confirm that?
thought we knew that he did.
I just said rumor because I didn't know, but if he did, I'm going to say he did. Let's say he
I
did.
do know
That is
the
a better
Friday
story.
the 13th director. I forget his name, but he did do porn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they started out as these exploitation type directors, you know. It's interesting kind of basically what is the humble beginnings of some of these people who we consider these cinematic greats who like made some of the most iconic horror films of all time. So to me,
when you hear Wes Craven, when you think of horror directors, right? You think of Wes Craven, you think of John Carpenter, and I kind of lump those two guys in the same boat, so to speak. But and I'm not knocking Carpenter because I love his films, but he is definitely a static director. He doesn't like moving the camera too much, where Craven is flowing with the action, he's building the suspense. So that's definitely why I think he was, like you said, the perfect person for this type of script.
yeah,
Just he made it pop and bring to life.
that's an interesting point. If Carpenter had directed Scream, would it have been as good? And if you read the Halloween script, it's an extremely boring script, and it's because it was written by a writer who is also a director, and it's him basically planning out his film. It's entirely written to describe the shots in the film. Like it doesn't give anything else besides saying, "Oh, this is a very low angle shot of Laurie falling down the stairs, Michael coming down after her." It's a manual, and it's extremely boring because we know the dialogue is not that great. The babysitter dialogue is really kind of actually lame in Halloween, but it doesn't matter. So there's that one line that Tatum says in Scream, where she's like, "You're like in one of those Wes Carpenter movies."
Duck other said, "You're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something."
Yeah.
So there are several references that like they mentioned the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels are lame. The one thing that Craven did add in is
Dream Warriors is great though. So
yeah. But Craven was involved in that one. So
yeah.
But Craven also added in the cameo with the janitor, Freddy.
Damn little shits.
What'd you call me? Huh?
Not your friend.
And
But-
like if he's in on the joke enough to do that cameo with that character, then again, that's just perfect material matching with the director essentially.
This may distract away from the main point, but what do you guys think of Ready Player One that Spielberg did? Because the original novel has a lot of Spielberg references, and it's basically like that was written with the person thinking like, "Oh, Spielberg did this? That'd be nuts." And then Spielberg actually did it. And a lot of people just think like it's kind of too much.
Never saw
I
it.
read half the book and watched the movie, and I don't remember anything about it.
I mean, I guess it's because in the terms of Spielberg's greater career, it doesn't really stand out, you know.
It's pretty forgetful. It's like
It's-
greatest hits.
Like, Spielberg doesn't play Overwatch and he just has Tracer in there and he's just, like, well, the kids will like it. So that's kind of
He
the
had a
vibe.
PA tell him what to throw into that movie essentially.
It's fine. It's okay, but like I said,
The,
the grand scream of it. Wow, I just made a pun.
Ooh, nice. The Shining
to.
scene in Ready Player One is really well done, though. I think.
Again, that's something you can tell he was passionate about. Like that's
Yeah.
not in the book.
No.
So Spielberg knew Kubrick, loves The Shining, wanted to make this great tribute to it. So that's the point I'm making is if John Carpenter had done Scream and it has this ending where they're watching Halloween and it's like a reference to Halloween, there's a killer while they're like, would that have worked?
I feel like when he read that, he'd be like, "I'm not doing this. That's stupid."
So Halloween isn't mentioned in the script. There's no. this is
Oh, you're
something
right. It's not.
I
We're
wanted to
watching
point
Terror
out.
Train, aren't they, in the script?
They have it as an option, but they don't ever clarify what's happening. This is something I wanted to point out that I think is actually good, that a lot of you guys can notice this. A lot of screenwriters we read from write these scripts that are just so dependent on other things.
Yep.
Whether it's
Guilty. First script.
whether it's music or movies, that it's very unnecessary for. I mean, the music in Scream is actually pretty iconic too. That Red Right Hand is,
Oh, it's so good.
That's that's such a good horror. Like the way that I think he closes the car door, like the music hits.
Designed and directed by his red right hand.
Sure is quiet.
It's really good. But
And I
not
can't listen
mentioned.
to that song without thinking of Scream.
Yeah,
Oh, that's all I think of. Yeah.
it's
like-
not mentioned at all in the script. It doesn't say, "Oh, here we go, Red Right Hand." And that's, you know, people write screenplays and they'll throw in a popular song and they're dependent on that song and they expect it to carry the mood for them because their writing's lackluster. Same thing with referencing a movie and saying like, oh, they're sitting down, they're watching this very specific movie that's better than the script that's been written, and now you're thinking about that movie, so it's kind of distracting. And also because, you know, rights in terms of stuff, like if he'd written that script and said Halloween and John Carpenter had said no way, then it looks kind of lame in retrospect when you read the script and say, oh, they wanted to be Halloween. If he'd said no and they got Terror Train, you'd be like, oh, they always intended to get Terror Train. So that's something you can learn from the Scream script if you're a writer, is don't be too dependent on other sources of entertainment that obviously cost money to buy, you know, that you reference in your own script. It's fine if you make it necessary, you know, if you've written in a song that the characters talk about and is actually relevant to the plot, that's fine. But if it's just to set the mood, you're just adding lines to add to pages and making your script longer at that point. For something,
but even if it's
just
incorporated in a way that affects the plot, that is still something that makes it a lot harder to sell your script, regardless of how important it is to plot. In fact, if it's more important to the plot, that's kind of even worse most of the time.
no
So
doubt.
generally avoid that sort of stuff, even if it's used well.
That's what I was struck by with the Scream screenplay, is how sellable it was. It's funny in retrospect that both Craven and Williamson loved the title Scary Movie. And Weinstein said, we're going to change it to Scream. That's far more marketable. And they were like angry at him and thinking like, oh, that's a terrible name. No one's going to want to see that. In retrospect, you know, I guess because our mind's a little warped by the Scary Movie franchise. But Scream seems like the better, simpler choice. And that's always, to me, if you're trying to sell a script, you want to have the simple, like if anyone has a really long title or their log line is multiple lines and it's just a very complex script, I'm just thinking like, this isn't going to sell. It's going to, you know, they'll see what it is in the first 10 pages. And from reading this screenplay, it's so simple. That opening scene, one of the things I noticed about Craven is how well he, you know, uses the environments. Like there's barely any description on the house in Drew Barrymore's house. It's just, you know, here's a selfie, here's the phone. But Craven added in the popcorn. He added in like the lighting. You can see like there's a pool outside, which has this cool misty atmosphere. There's just so much, you know, that if you try and cram into your own screenplay, like if you say there's a pool outside, there's a light mist coming off of it, you know, you can see the light hitting it. It's like, that's so unnecessary because it's up to the director, you know, like you're not directing a film when you write a screenplay. In a way, it is a guidebook to how to make a film. It's always meant to be a final product of a movie. It has to serve that. So if you get too lost in that and try and start directing while you're writing, it's gonna make it unsellable. And directors are gonna read it and say like, well, I'm gonna wanna do this, so why are you clarifying all this? So that to me is the best thing you learn from Scream, is basically writing something simple that's also new and fresh.
I feel like a point that sort of stems off that is how Wes Craven changes a lot of the action from the original screenplay. That Williamson, there's a lot of things that, a lot of the elements that ended up cut or changed were elements that work really well on the page, but Craven saw them and was like, okay, this will work better in a more condensed form or not at all in the film. For example, there's an early thing in the opening where she's walking by window to window, checking to see like where Ghostface is in the room. And Craven changed that from a sort of 1, 2, 3 style, like Rule 3 payoff, into a more simple, condensed version that works much better on the screen, even though the original version reads really well on the page.
And Ghostface isn't described that much in the script. Like,
not at all.
Yeah, it just says like a dude in a robe with a ghostly face. Like,
and the voice isn't described either.
Yeah, that to me is what was interesting, was it just says like man, you know, like
yep.
Whenever it has, and there's not even, it doesn't even say like voiceover or off screen, you know. It's a very straightforward and simple. But like what you were saying with the action, one thing I noticed was there's a scene where Drew Barrymore's character, Casey, right? She gets knocked down and he goes to stab her, and she blocks the stab with the phone that she's holding. And that's so kind of ridiculous. And I guess he thought he was being clever there, but like on screen, it would look stupid and take you out of it. What I like about Scream is the action. Ghostface takes a lot of damage. Like one other thing not in the script is that scene in the garage where Tatum is just flinging beer bottles at him. And it's so funny. What Craven does is he takes the action and he makes it real. Like during that phone scene, what happens is she just smacks the knife away and then knees him in the balls. And that's Craven making, the action real. He had that history as an exploitation director. And he understands, if you have this goofy kind of light action, it's not going to sit with the audience if you try and get clever with it. So when you watch any of the action in Scream, it benefits from having a real grounded feeling, and also that the villain can take damage. There's a chance the villain could be, overpowered.
It's also refreshing to see that, because you don't see that too often in slasher movies. You see Jason and people can't attack him, right? You see Myers, and here you have the feeling that maybe the characters actually have a chance of escaping, because Sidney is basically flipping him over when she's on the ground, and she's flipping him over and running up the stairs. It just makes it, like you said, more grounded, a little bit comical in certain ways on how they deal with it.
No doubt. I mean, I'm saying it's grounded and real, but it is still funny.
It balances both damage for sure, I think. And you don't see that in movies like that anymore, or even back in the 90s. Like in I Know What You Did Last Summer, you don't see them interacting with the killer in that way.
Also, Kevin Williamson.
Yeah. Well, he had the 90s big there. What do we all think of Sidney as a protagonist?
I think personally, I really like her. I think she's one of my favorite Final Girls. Specifically,
but do you think that's because of the script, or do you think that's because of Neve Campbell?
Well, because I'm having trouble, because I'm thinking, is it just because she's the opposite of everything a Final Girl is supposed to be?
Yeah.
Because I think that's why I like her. But that's just how the script's written.
Again, she's sort of simple, like in terms of what her character is. There's not much terribly complex about that. She wants to be the opposite of what her mother was, and she also doesn't want to be killed. It's a very simple, protagonist story. Yeah. And it works because I think she makes a acceptable amount of pop culture references. That's why I think she works. I think a lesser writer would have made her an absolute pop culture nerd reference machine.
I would have made her the Randy.
Yeah, no, like that's what actually I wanted to say, is that Randy is the most pop culture heavy character in the script, and that works because not everyone else talks like him. This is the big problem a lot of meta movies have, is they will have every single character have the same knowledge of movies that the writer does. And as a result, you're just watching the writer through several characters. And that's why Scream is able to stand out, because Sidney is her own character. That's, if they're playing Halloween at a party, it's not gonna be, wow, John Carpenter's Halloween released in 1978. She's just like, cool, I'm gonna go in the other room, have sex with Billy. It's like she's different from the other characters, and that's what clearly sets her apart and makes her, to me, one of the better Final Girls.
Well, all the side characters fall into those character cliche tropes: the promiscuous friend, the geek with Randy, the bad boy or whatever. You've seen those characters before in other films, and they work here, but they definitely make Sidney as a character, I think, pop a little bit more.
Well, Sidney, she's good in the script, but she's definitely a better Final Girl in the movie, because this was we're going to get into the big changes here, but the ending is very different. And every change I've seen that was made from the script to the movie was for the better. There's nothing I can think of in the script there's one thing I can think of, which was the beginning when Casey's boyfriend is killed. When you watch that in the movie, it's kind of off screen. You don't really understand what's happening. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You hear like the guts falling out. She's like, ugh, and that's it, and you see like his face go, ugh. Well, he dies. And like the script, it says like, oh, you see his guts just spilling out. And I'm thinking that was the censors. I'm thinking they filmed it and the censors just said, no way. And they didn't have a backup shot. I'm assuming that's what the problem was, but that's just, movie MPA bullshit. So I don't think it's on Craven. But every change he made was for the better. And at the end, the original ending is that Randy asked Sydney out on a date. You can see you shaking your head there, and that's
Read the room, guy.
I know. It's just something else I noticed. It's a big problem. A lot of horror scripts we read is, and even things I've written, I can admit this. The mood is not right for the conversations that are happening. Like people think it's quirky to have someone get murdered, and they're like, "Well, what are you doing tomorrow?" You know, just because they need a nice, snappy ending. And for a lot of people, that means, oh, two characters hook up or fall in love.
And
so
I feel like that is something that people get tripped up over with a lot of genre often. Like right now, especially with our B movie challenge, there's a lot of moments where they feel they have to be really irreverent with every scene because their script is inherently comedic. Even so, during serious scenes that should have emotional impact, the emotional impact is lost because they're trying to keep the tone very like light and irreverent, but that doesn't exactly work all the time. You have to have some amount of tonal like shifting and balance to pull off effective characters.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. The changes are definitely better, like you said, whereas the script is one voice, it's Williamson creating the story. But now you've got the director and you've got the actors playing these characters. They feel like they know them, and you've got a collaborative effort on how to make the action in the ending and even simple dialogue between two characters for the better.
I'll go into the worst line here. We know what the worst line is. Let me scroll down and read it exactly. But
it just doesn't even sound like something the character Sydney would say. Like it seems so out of place.
But okay, so I was ready for this line because my favorite line is
not in my movie.
Yeah, it's a killer line.
It's an amazing line. So good. And it just, it is its own individual unique thing while playing off of old tropes, which is the exact reason why Scream works. Anyway, so that line's gone. And Sydney instead says, and this Billy Stud Bucket is for having an incredibly small weenie.
It just doesn't she wouldn't say that.
That is something that you'd find in Scary Movie.
I know.
Exactly.
That's what I was thinking.
When you shared that with us, like the first time, I thought you were doing like a bit.
No.
Because I couldn't believe she called him a stud bucket.
I put down the script because I was just like, it's such a clearly, with a script full of just such very witty, sharp dialogue with no fat, that's the line you choose.
It's too wordy too. You need something quick and punchy, it's not like in the movie. Like
that is, if you heard someone genuinely murder someone and say that, you'd be like, well, it was really off the top of your head there. You didn't plan that one at all. You weren't thinking about throwing that one out there at all. But also because it's my favorite line, that it's just, and followed by that is immediately, hey, Randy, want to go out?
Yeah.
So much is fixed in that ending. Dewey lives. Gail gets to have her report at the end. Like Gail doesn't, it's like Dewey, it's inferred he dies, right?
Well, he did die, and then he was dead, and then I think test screenings were like, yo, where's Dewey?
Oh yeah.
So they like reshot it so that he was getting wheeled out on the gurney.
Because his death is just kind of, it just kind of happens.
Yeah, it's very, what's the word? Unceremoniously done.
Another thing that really works better in the film is in the script, Dewey is a stud bucket as previously described. And when Gail flirts with him, it's kind of like, oh, hey, here's this hot young stud. He's described as a muscular young, there's a line on the movie when Gail walks up to him and says, like, does the force require you to work out? And it's so funny because Dewey's just this normal dude.
Does the force require you to work out?
No, ma'am. Because of my boyish good looks, muscle mass has increased my acceptance as a serious police officer.
But in the script, Dewey is a big old hunk of police officer. And he's like, yeah, I get to do my own thing. It's because he's flexing his muscles there. But in the movie, it works so much better because it plays off of David Arquette being funny. It's not like sexualizing this random character who's just there to die and be a distraction in case you need more people to think, who could the killer be?
And the relationship with Tatum makes more sense when he is David Arquette instead of muscular, good-looking guy, because she's constantly throwing disses at him the entire time.
Can we just talk about that Courtney Cox is flirting with him by saying he doesn't look a day over 12?
Of course, you don't look a day over 12, except in that upper torso area.
Okay, yeah, that was a little.
In what world is that a compliment to an adult man?
I mean, okay, so I like that scene in the movie.
No, it's funny and it's like goofy. It works.
The flirting's so bad on both of their parts. That's why people kind of like them together is because they saw that and said like, well, here's two characters that are just as equally awkward, but they think that they're the ones who are cool, you know?
Right.
And they don't kiss in the script, right?
No.
And they kiss in the movie.
Do they?
Yeah, it's a genuine kind of love growing type story in the original, you know?
Oh, they're
And in the
very
script,
believable, like as like falling in love with each other or like growing feelings with each other. Like it totally feels right, like natural.
in the script, it's just, you know, here's hot stud bucket police officer man and typical annoying newswoman. And I guess they're both attractive, you know? It was just like, there wasn't as much to it. There were some funny lines with it. It was just there to kind of fill the quota for we needed more characters to possibly suspect for who the killer would be. And the script is better reading in retrospect when you know who the killers are, because there's things I actually picked up on. Like,
ooh, I was just gonna say the Blockbuster scene. When Stu and Billy are walking the Blockbuster. First of all, it's great that they cut that out because it's very unnecessary. You pointed that out.
Yes.
Super unnecessary and feels kind of out of place. But it totally feels like they're like Stu is the not Stu. Billy's the killer. The way he's asking, no, they're both the killers. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
But Billy is asking Stu if he made sure Sydney's gonna be there. And I don't know if I was just reading into it being like, well, that's kind of shady because I know he's the killer, or if that would have totally given it away in the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenes that are in there. Here's the best thing Craven did was that he cut out these setup scenes. Like you talked about, like in the movie, it cuts from one scene to them in Blockbuster. And in the script, it has them walking to Blockbuster, which is very pointless. The scene that you messaged me about and said, like, why is there a scene of Sydney's father walking to her car while Sydney's asleep or something? It's
so
just
pointless.
A very pointless scene. And I guess it's just to show, oh, hey, here's Sydney's father actually going to his car because he goes missing later. You know, it wanted to show that he left the house. But you don't
her
need
alarm or her radio is playing like a news broadcast about Casey Becker being murdered. But like other than that,
you go to the school and find it out. There's no reason for that.
Yeah. Well, this is the classic screenwriting rule of like enter late and leave early. Of like you need to, if you have all this like setup and like endings sort of stuff, none of your scenes feel like contained at all. You never really. It kills the flow of your script. So
I complimented that it's so simple of a script, but there is fat on that script. And one thing I want to point out to make everyone feel better is that there are grammar errors and misspelling mistakes in this draft of Scream that gets sold. So any of you that feel bad about submitting something that has grammar errors, it's fine. Scream sold that way.
Also, I screenshotted something because there's a bit where he's talking to the reader. And that just made me very happy because I remember that too. Time.
Is it like in the first scene with Casey? I think I made a note of it as well.
There might be a different one, and of course, the screenshot doesn't say what page it is, but it's when Sid and Tatum are sitting on like her deck, and you see Ghostface like watching them, and it literally says, "His presence so subtle and unobtrusive, you'd have to see this movie a second time to know he was there all along." And I'm just like, that's a great line, and everyone on who reads my scripts would tell me that's pointless and you don't need to have it in it.
Well, it also works with it being a meta story, right? So
okay, fair.
It flows well with what he's trying to do within the movie, I think.
He does it a few times, though.
Yes.
There's one I like. It says here on page 7, it says like, no answer, fuck this, which is basically she's trying to figure out who is outside. She calls and there's no answer. So it just says, fuck this, you know? And I know a boring script would be like, no answer. You know, just like, saying fuck this has a much better flow to it and it's more fun. It goes with the theme of what Scream is.
During that whole scene, because there's not a lot of dialogue when she's like panicking, there's like he does write like the emotion that she's like kind of going through. I can't think of any examples, but like going off of what you said with fuck this, like he gets a little more descriptive with her actions.
There's a good middle ground for having your own voice in a script in terms of like doing the Mark Twain thing and talking to your audience. Because for some people, they can't write something unique enough and they're trying to make it stand out and be quirky about it. And for other ones, Rennie Harlan, I'm thinking if he directed the movie, Long Kiss Goodnight, which is written by Shane Black. Anyway,
my guy.
Yeah, there is a sex scene And in the script, if you read the script, it says, "Mom, turn the page now," at like the top of the page, because he knows his mom reads the scripts and he doesn't want her to read the sex scene. And if I had read that in like one of our contest scripts, I'd be like, okay, really? But like, as you know, a Shane Black script, I get it, you know, that's his style. So it's kind of something you have to earn and also find a good balance for.
You have to make it first to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, Will, your scripts have that style of the no answer, fuck this, you know, that like it's a much more free flowing type thing. And unless you know you're not strict, you know, you have more fun with it. But I have seen, here's something I want to point out, is that newbie writers, especially in horror, I went over this in the last podcast we did, they will write a script that is so dependent on past horror movies. And
I literally did that for my first two scripts.
Same. I mean, like I said, the first script I ever wrote, the main characters were named Michael, Jason, Fred, and Bob. That was Bob from Twin Peaks. I had to throw in someone else there. So, and you read the screenplay, she lives on Elm Street, which it never is clarified in the movie. But that'd be a little odd. I mean, I get the reference there. But with everything else, it'd be odd that she lives on Elm Street. And that to me,
there's one in every town, dude.
I know.
It's like the most common street name. It actually makes more sense.
To have the director of Nightmare on Elm Street and directing this girl who lives on Elm. But the point I'm making is that horror movies are what made us want to, you know, write these horror scripts.
Well, yeah, and we think we're clever and we know all these movies, so we're like, oh, I want to show everyone how knowledgeable I am of the genre by including these sick references.
So there's a joke, you know, like I said, whenever she says this is like a Wes Carpenter movie, you know, but like a lesser, that was obviously just, oh, she doesn't know the actual name. A lesser script would have an actual director named Wes Carpenter or something, you know, who like appears, and it's just like a take on that. And it's because, like I said, the horror writers not able to form their own voice and have a unique take on the horror material. And that's why meta horror filmmaking was such a new thing in the 90s, that it really charted the path for what the horror genre will become now.
Well,
you want to talk about the supermarket scene?
I don't think that scene even belongs in the movie.
That is
just such filler.
Yeah. Because
and the fact that Dewey's not eating an ice cream cone after that scene is a crime against cinema.
Honestly, even in the final film, I think that scene, it's much cut from the script, but honestly, that scene doesn't need to be in the film to begin with.
Well, I don't think it makes sense. Like, why? How is Ghostface in the supermarket? Like,
I know. That's what doesn't make sense to me. There's this kind of like spook quota they're trying to fill with Ghostface running around. And the dialogue there is so bad. It's entirely about like penis size. And they cut that out of the film, thank God.
Thankfully.
But this scene is just them. They go to the grocery store, and then Sydney asks about. I don't know if she asked, but it gets brought up as penis size because she's expecting to have sex with Billy that night.
Oh, this is tying back to his small penis.
Yes, so they set it up that she asks about penis size or something, and there is some obscure sitcom or something Tatum references that has a guy that she says.
Oh, and she has that song that she sings when she's having sex with Stu.
Yeah, so
it's very weird. Yeah, it's very weird.
But then Sydney sings that song.
That's
when
right.
She has sex with Billy, and in the movie, it is so much better because it is intercut with the scene in Halloween, the sex scene from Halloween. Like they take I'm forgetting the actress's name, but in Halloween, she takes her top off and it cuts to Sydney taking her clothes off. And it's so much more effective as opposed to
with the meta dialogue too.
Kevin Williamson just having pages about penis size. Which every writer has their thing, their little trope that they have. And he was that's something that Craven saw and said, no, this is going to distract too much.
And like that's the big difference between movies that are directed by the people who wrote them and movies that are directed by not the person who wrote them. Is like when you're adapting somebody else's script, you have to put your own touch on it, and so Craven does that.
So we've learned basically what Craven's directing, how that stood out, you know, how it changed things, and the writing. With your own writing, having read the screenplay, is there anything you think you can learn from it? Like that you would try if you were teaching someone, you had the screenplay in front of you for Scream, and said, "Here's what you can learn. Here's the one thing you can learn." What do you think? What do you think that would be?
I'm gonna steal something from both you, Ben, and Jonas, because I'm definitely was more guilty of this. Was not starting. What did you say, Jonas? Start late, leave early, or something? What did you say?
Yeah, you enter late and leave early.
Enter late and leave early. So maybe it's not taking it from Kevin Williamson, but taking it from Wes Craven, because I feel like I always start my scenes too early and then linger too long. Whereas you clearly don't need to have two characters walking to Blockbuster or Sydney's dad leaving in his car.
There's things that get like somebody reads your script and they'll tell you something and you're like, that was so obvious, you know?
Yeah.
And
you just don't notice it when you write it.
Yeah, it's hard to be objective about, like, I'm sure there's things with that script, if Williamson had waited months, you know, like, and read it later, that he'd say like, okay, maybe I don't need this 5-page conversation about penis size in my
I think he would have kept that
movie.
I would
be longer.
Yeah.
But and I okay, he wouldn't need, you know, like the setup scene with like Sydney's dad getting in the car. Like you can read that and say, okay, maybe not. And that's actually with my script for the contest we just did for this. I read Scream, I saw that car scene, and I said, there's a scene which is a character just taking the bus to get to the airport. And I got rid of that and it cut straight to the airport. And it just taught me, you don't need to have these setups for scenes when you can jump to the main action.
Much like you, how when you read the Scream script and then you went back into your current script for the B Movie Challenge to change certain things, I kind of did the same with mine, because in the opening scene with Casey, there's a part where he, for lack of a better word, cuts to an exterior description of the house. And this is mid-scene when Casey's talking to the man, Ghostface, on the phone. And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, I would never do that in my own script, because that is a director visual type thing. And I'm just thinking about the story, and I'm trying to think of, you know, point A to point B.
I've seen people do that where they have exterior, like they'll have some mansion, it'll be like exterior shot mansion, a mansion at night, and it goes interior mansion, you know. It's like, we get it, you know. It's there's nothing you can say there, and if you try and say too much, people will say like, oh, hey, look, he's directing, you know.
Exactly. It worked from when I read this, because it showed for me how isolated the house was, and, you know, possibly where he could be outside and whatnot. But elements like that to me is just like a directing visual thing. That's not a screenwriter thing.
You can tell Williamson's afraid people will get confused, and that's why he clarifies stuff like, oh, hey, Sydney's dad gets in the car leaves, you know, so you know he wasn't kidnapped or anything.
He was,
but he's kidnapped later.
Wait, where did they kidnap him?
I guess at the airport. I don't know. That's, you know, on
the
road.
To quickly go to the grocery store thing, like you said, it's unnecessary, and in the movie it's kind of unnecessary, because I don't think they talk about what I think is actually happening, is that when you see Ghostface, it is neither Billy or Stu, it's just another student that's trying to scare them, like you see when
that's
the
a good theory, actually.
mask off.
Can I go off of that real quick? I know we're well past the supermarket, but I think it's more effective. It's more effective in the movie. It still makes no sense.
It
but
works
then
in the movie more than the script, for sure.
Well, no, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why it was more effective.
Funny.
Educate me, please.
It works more in the movie because we still don't know who the killers are or the killer is. And then it quickly cuts to Dewey eating an ice cream cone. Where did he get that ice cream cone? At the supermarket.
he paid for it while he was wearing the ghost face.
Yes.
Okay.
It's throwing a red herring right at us. Because Dewey was a theory that Dewey was the killer, or that he was the third killer.
Anytime I would see a ghost face out in public, I'm just assuming that's somebody trying to pull a prank, because
it's David Arquette.
The one in school is very clearly, it has to be a prank.
I would guess it's definitely not Billy, because she just saw
he gets slammed in the face with the door, and Stu's just been hanging out in the bathroom for like
much
3
hours in the film than it is in
that whole interaction is bad in the movie. Not bad, but it's not the movie, the script. It's much better in the movie.
Well, they parody it in the second one when Luke Wilson is in Scream 2 when they do stab.
Oh, yeah.
One other line I liked that was changed was whenever they say, what would your motive be? And Randy in the script says, it's 1995. Motives are incidental.
Yeah.
And in the movie, it says, it's the millennium, you know? You don't need
I wish
motives
they
anymore.
kept
So
that
much better.
because the movie came out in 1996.
Millennium. Millennium, I like that. That's good.
That's always like I hate writing years in my own scripts because then I go look at my own portfolio. People are like, it's 2018, you know, guess who the president is? And I'm like reading it now. I'm like, okay, this is dated, you know.
I never
That's-
write a year, and I never specifically tell a location because I want it to be able to take place whenever and wherever, essentially.
Same, but also I'm just not knowledgeable enough to describe any sort of location.
I've seen
Yeah, if you tell a
people-
location, you have to do research, and that's hard.
Yeah, I don't do research, so you can figure out where it is.
I've seen scripts where people say like the year is 20XX and they just like don't clarify. They just like leave the XX there so they can just put in whatever if it ever does get sold. And I always think that's kinda funny.
Exterior longitude, latitude, 81 degrees.
I can personally pull for my scripts from this that stood out to me is that there's a lot of, like, we talked about how a lot of these characters other than Sydney are very stereotypical, right? But I feel like in a lot of ways they're archetypes of characters that are really important to have in this sort of story, with especially the meta commentary. But what Craven does incredibly well, even better than the original script does, is that they all have very specific, unique voices and personalities. So for each scene, they can sort of have their own presence. They're all very entertaining, and so even though they are these stereotypical kind of characters, they have unique personalities and such. So when you're writing a script and you have to have these sort of character archetypes to keep the story going, that's not inherently a bad thing if you have unique character traits and they stand out and are
Yeah.
entertaining to watch.
That's the
blend
true mark
together.
of a great director to me, is if they are able to make their characters stand out. And I hate the Steve Jobs movie because, like, I love The Social Network, one of my favorite movies of all time. And in the Steve Jobs movie, every single person is the same. And it is so annoying that they all talk like that. And yes, they're all very witty and have this, you know, great retort with each other in Social Network, but they're different characters who are able to stand, you know, with their own merits and have their own personality. And just, you know, basically when they hold a conversation, it's obviously two different characters that are just having this very witty Aaron Sorkin dialogue. So, and I think if I just read the script for Social Network alone, I'd say, well, this is great. A lot of these characters sound the same to me. But when you have a great director like Fincher or like Craven with Scream, you know, directing these actors and giving them something different, making them stand out, he's able to elevate what is a very good pitch, what is, you know, a very witty dialogue, and make it into something incredibly unique. It really was a perfect marriage of Williamson being, you know, I'm going to say a relatively new writer who had a very fresh take, pairing up with a horror master who was actually very reluctant at first because he didn't want to do any more horror movies. He said, I'm done. Like he did like a Meryl Streep, Oscar Bates movie about music or something after this.
I see. After 10 years, after 1,400 kids have learned the violin. You think I haven't noticed what you've done for these kids?
He was just like, I'll make Scream if you get me Meryl Streep. Like that was his deal. Was he signed this contract where he said like, I want to do an Oscar bait movie with a Meryl, and they're like, whatever, man. So they got him on, and it worked out for the better because he was reluctant, because he was this horror master who didn't know, you know, if he wanted to do horror again.
It's definitely like a lightning in the bottle type situation. They tried to replicate it with the sequels, and the sequels basically became what the first movie was commentating on.
Can you all think of bad meta horror? Like any horror movies that do meta that you just do not think are good?
I hate to say this, but Leslie Vernon, or Behind the Mask, Leslie Vernon.
Okay, yeah, that was. I'm okay
Never
with
seen
it.
I dig that one, but I can understand that.
It was
maybe
too much. Like literally, the
I
music
thought I
from
should
The
have
Shining
liked it
was
so
playing.
much, and then
To have a converse sort of take that might also be hot. I don't like The Final Girls. I think that movie hates horror movies. It feels like it comes from an outside perspective of somebody who looks down on horror. And
I don't
think
like
that's
when someone
really
acts like they're better than the genre that they're doing. That's what kills those movies for me.
That movie, Final Girls, you hit the nail on the head because it's trying to be a love letter to a genre, but it doesn't have anything in the movie that made that genre so much fun. There's no blood, there's no sex, there's none of that stuff. It just feels sort of neutered.
It feels ignorant. It feels like the person who's making it is not familiar with the genre.
feel like we're finally getting a rant from you. I've wanted this the entire podcast. But no, I can agree with that. Like, I don't like when the director or writer for a genre looks down on that genre. And that's meta horror. You have to have some respect for what you're doing, you know, like kaiju movies, you know, you have to love, you know, the freaking giant monsters beating each other up. You can't say like, hey, look at how stupid this is. Hey, look at how fake this is. It just becomes, you know, it doesn't work.
King Kong,
yeah. We got, you know, only less than 24 hours, I guess. I'm gonna watch.
Yep, gonna get up at 6 and watch it before work.
On the treadmill, just running.
Isn't it 3 hours long?
No, it's
I thought it
4
was 2
hours.
hours long.
Yeah.
I wish it was 4 hours long.
But I mean, I haven't seen that movie, but it's got good reviews. And I'm thinking that's because the guy who made it respects
horror guy.
movies.
You're next.
Right? Adam
Wingard.
Yep. Wingard. It's
I don't
Wing
know.
something.
Your next is really good, by the way, puppy. Or excuse me, Jonas.
Like Your Next and The Guest are obviously influenced by horror movies of the past. You know, they've got that 80s synth score for The Guest. You know, he's basically Michael Myers if he was hot. Like that's the plot of The Guest.
Oh, and Jason Bourne. There's that
he's
spoiler.
Michael Myers,
Whoops.
Jason Bourne, hottie body, and that's just the simple pitch of it. That's the point I'm making. That like I'm noticing more and more that I liked horror movies that are just simple, you know, that are elevated in the filmmaking process, you know, by a great cast, a great director. And the pitch for it is, you know, the pitch for Halloween is just masked guy kills babysitters. The original script, the name was called The Babysitter Murders. It's a very boring title. And it's honestly, you know, that pitch now, if you made it now, wouldn't stand out. There's nothing to make it stand out. But at the time when nothing like that had been made, nothing had been that scary, you know, nothing had that good of a score, you know, had, you know, that kind of lighting in an American film, because he went to Suspiria actually was what influenced the lighting for Halloween. So you can always see the genesis of these types of movies and how they influence, you know, like I said, we're having so many meta horror movies now after Cabin in the Woods really kicked things off with that. And a lot of them aren't good because they look down, and writers can't look down on what they're writing. And Williamson didn't. He wrote that script, Scary Movie, because he loved horror movies, and it's all the better for it. It changed the horror genre. And I'll let y'all talk more, but I wanted to end by saying that Scary Movie grossed more than Scream did at the box office, and I always thought that was funny. And if you want to analyze, well, I saw you made a face there, but it's just like nothing against Scary Movie, but it's very funny that audiences would prefer to see a Scary Movie.
Well, I mean, that says how much people love Scream, because they're going to see a movie that's parodying what they love, right?
True.
Good point. I just want to go off of that and let you guys know that David Arquette often gets called Doofy, like when he's walking around. I don't know if I either read this or if it was in the documentary, the You Cannot Kill David Arquette, but like fans run up to him and then like, Doofy, and then he's like, I wasn't even in that movie.
I would literally attack people. I think that's what Scream 5 is going to be. Here's what we can end on. What would be your pitch for Scream 5, since that's happening with the Ready or Not guys?
Dewey has a handlebar mustache.
Okay.
His mustache has gotten thicker and thicker as the films have progressed, so I do think that's a natural progression.
But I'm confused by what they're gonna do for it, because
it has to be they're gonna ignore Scream 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, that'd be hilarious.
That's what they're gonna they're gonna be like, oh, the killer is ignoring the I don't know what they'll call them. They won't call them sequels, but that has to be it, right?
That'd be so
because that's
funny.
like the new thing is to ignore.
That would
But
be
nothing
meta.
important happened in Scream 2 or 3 besides that she meets Carrie Fisher.
I was up for Princess Leia. I was this close. So who gets it? The one who sleeps with George Lucas.
There's
No, because she has a brother.
Oh,
in 3.
yeah. Okay.
And in 4, her cousin's crazy, which that was a reboot or remake. So now this one is gonna ignore all the
retcon.
continuity.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
honestly,
she doesn't have a brother now. She doesn't have a cousin.
dang.
Taking it back to the roots. Billy's back. Stu's back.
That means Randy's back.
Randy's back. Randy never died. Randy never died.
Yeah, justice for Jamie Kennedy. He's not a main character in all the Scream films.
He's in the third one though with the videotape, and I think it's so funny. His sister shows up, whom we've never ever seen in any of the other Scream movies, and she's like, "Oh, Randy left this tape in case he died."
Yeah, they pull a Jigsaw where it's just like, oh no, this actor was clearly the best part of these movies. We have to incorporate him again somehow.
Wes Craven got hate mail for killing him off in the second one. That's how much people loved the character of Randy.
I have a little fun fact trivia regarding Randy. There is a reference that Randy got a blowjob at the fraternity party, and then he immediately died afterwards because he had some sort of sexual relation.
Dang.
Which ties back to the bad ending where he talks about celebrating being a virgin when he lives.
Does hit different when you watch as a virgin. I'm glad, you watched it when you were 7, and
I was not a virgin when I was 7.
You're qualified to write Scream 5. I know they're filming it right now, but I think this podcast needs to take off so you can write Scream 5. I honestly want to hear your full pitch for Scream 5. Like, I think that, everyone here can write.
I'm not kidding. It would be ignoring the sequels. Like, I think that's
really, to me, they
meta
just have to
commentary.
embrace being absurd,
Yeah.
Like, that's the best option they have because they've already done a reboot, and making fun of that.
Which I think works really well. That's why I like Scream 4 the second most.
I didn't know if there's any other topics you want to cover, but I think that ending off with Scream 5, killing everyone else, Jamie Kennedy blowjob is actually pretty good.
One more thing. I'm gonna go off of what Jonas said about the director making the characters like stick out on their own. I think Wes Craven gave them more room to play, which led to Matthew Lillard's iconic scene on the phone at the party where he's like, "You dick, you hit me with the phone," or whatever. And like the fact that Craven let him improv, I think that that's an incredible scene where he's like, "My parents,
like,
my mom and dad are gonna be so mad."
Yeah,
yeah.
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
Like, it works for the character. Like, it totally. I thought it would have been in the script, and I was really surprised when it wasn't.
As a writer, you don't have to be absolutely married to your material,
Yeah.
And that's right. Good. Actors are going to take what you've created and build off
right
and do their own thing or add a line that's iconic, like it's much better that Indiana Jones just shoots that guy with the sword instead of having this big battle. And it's because Harrison Ford was like, I'm not doing this shit. I'm tired. I have diarrhea because I've eaten terrible food.
Okay. So he did really have diarrhea because
he was sick. He was sick that day.
The entire crew was sick except for Spielberg because Spielberg only ate imported SpaghettiOs. I know this is a whole different topic for a podcast, but there's your Indiana Jones fun fact of the day: was Spielberg imported American SpaghettiOs, and that's why he didn't get sick.
Good to know.
I don't want to end on that fun fact though. I think I went over most things in my notes. I have a lot of notes saying supermarket bad.
Supermarket bad. That's very bad. Oh, a thing that I didn't like in the script was anytime a character talked before we saw them, he just put voice.
Yeah.
Like, I thought you weren't supposed to do that, but maybe not you weren't supposed to do it, but like, I thought you would just say the character's name and then like off screen or off camera, which I constantly have to Google which one is the appropriate one to use.
I don't know if the 90s were different.
One of those things that's kind of loose, I think. I do think it makes the screenplay a little bit more confusing, so I would personally not do it like he did, but yeah.
I'd like to hear the full situation of how he sold, like what his connections were beforehand. Like, I'm assuming he had an agent,
Did he do Dawson's Creek before or after this?
No, that was everything was because of the success of Scream, I believe.
Did he do anything before Scream?
I don't think he sold anything. I don't know.
He wrote stuff before, like he wrote Teaching Mrs. Tingle first.
Oh, that eventually
that was sold because of the success of Scream afterwards.
And that was called Killing Miss Tingle
originally, yeah.
But then Columbine happened, and they had to change it.
Fun fact: the TV show The Following is his original outline for Scream 3.
Oh yeah, Kevin Bacon.
Because Scream 3 got
that's nuts that he
fucked.
Snyder Reedon on Scream 3.
He was gonna bring Stu back too, which hurts.
And you can tell it suffers because he's not there, which is okay. Great point you brought up. that we've talked about so much about how Craven improved what Williamson wrote, but then Williamson's gone, and the Scream 3 is not good.
Well,
And
I
I'm
think
assuming-
they really formed a
Sorry.
relationship where like they really worked well with each other, and then taking that away, essentially, you took your knife off. It really distracted me.
Yeah, I was hurting my head.
They're shaving
I'm
it.
back for the sequel.
My understanding that it was basically a scheduling conflict of it's either going to be Nev Campbell on this or it's going to be Kevin Williamson, and he sort of backed out saying, Nev Campbell's the heart of the movies. Here's my outline, give it to whoever and go from there. And you lose that voice. I'm pretty sure like this original script was leaked and they had to change it a bunch of times. And it's just when you go through that many steps and hurdles, the final product is obviously not going to be on par with what's come earlier.
Yeah, when you get to the third film in a series too, people get kind of tired. Like I'm sure
They should have gone to space.
Well, once it gets to 5, that's when the series picks back up, right?
I'm assuming
they're
so.
going to Fast and Furious it.
They're gonna bring in Uncle DJ, Dwayne the Rock Johnson. I just wanted to say, Layden, did you know that Scream 3 is the only Scream with one killer? Yeah, you knew that definitely.
Yeah, of
Until
course.
Scream 5. You heard it here first, folks.
Just to reveal that we've actually written a screenplay for Scream 5.
I am the writers and directors of Ready or Not.
There is 2 of them.
I'm both of them. There's 2 of them, just like there's 2 killers in Scream.
They gotta it's got to be 3 or 4 this time, right? Everybody is a killer except for Sydney. There you go.
No, she is the killer, obviously, this time.
Yeah, that would be probably the way to kill the franchise, yeah.
My pitch for Scream 5 is it's just a prolonged divorce hearing between Dewey and Gale Weathers.
I hope they're still together.
That's
But
what I was
actually,
wondering, if they're gonna do that, or if like Dewey's gonna have some weird rant on like Howard Stern or something where he's really drunk, and it's just gonna derail their marriage. I don't want to rip into David Arquette here. He's a wonderful man. Spree was great. He was very good in that.
great movie.
Yeah, we're not having any riff here. We're just praising Arquette.
We love David Arquette. Come on the podcast that we don't really have.
On the
yet.
podcast, we have 2 episodes which have no connecting material at all.
Come on the pod. We want to talk 8-legged freaks.
Hey, I saw Ready to Rumble in theaters, so I've been a fan since the beginning.
That movie is not good.
If there was another script for a movie you'd want to do something similar for this on, what would you want that to be?
Like to make meta or to...
No, to analyze in a podcast.
Oh, to analyze. Does it have to be horror?
Preferably, but I'd like to hear what you're thinking now. If it's
Oh,
Kangaroo Jack, the stream's gonna end right now if you say Kangaroo Jack.
Look, if anyone listening or watching has the original Kangaroo Jack script, please reach out to me. It was originally an R-rated comedy for adults, and I need to read that script.
All right. The other guys, what would you want to see in a podcast? Kangaroo Jack. Snow Dogs is also not an acceptable answer.
Maybe something that's like adapted from a book, so you can sort of.
Okay, yeah.
Well, let's do a Stephen King one. Let's do Dr. Sleep.
Well, the only thing that pops into my brain immediately is I would probably want to do a movie that's a lot heavier and we talk thematic sort of stuff. So the movie that immediately pops in my head is, of course, that one.
Should I watch that movie?
You're paid by the French to plug that in the film.
Yeah.
You've commented on reviews of mine on Letterboxd that have nothing to do with Martyrs, and you're like, totally.
Yeah, I
Martyrs
bring it up too
mode.
much.
Did you see the American remake?
I have avoided the American remake because I've heard
that'd be
literally
very
not one good thing.
Reading if there's like a script for an American remake of a foreign horror film. Rec has an American remake, right?
Yes, but I feel like if
Quarantine.
you did that, The Grudge, The Ring would probably be the best one to do because that's a good original and a good remake.
Okay, yeah.
The Ring's great.
But I feel like all that comes down to Verbinski, his directing. Like, honestly, I mean, the script's fine, but
there's a lot of story details that are interesting to see how they changed.
I mean, that guy did Mouse Hunt. He's a very visual director, and you can definitely tell from
He did
watching
Mouse Hunt?
Did you not know that?
No.
Bro,
That's
Mouse
so
Hunt
much
is
random ass
good.
shit.
I don't think we'll be seeing any more of that.
Yeah.
You know what's weird
Watch
is
that
Mouse
movie.
Hunt
It doesn't.
scared
It's
me
not
more as a
shot
kid
like a comedy at all.
than The
It's
Ring.
shot
No.
like a dark film.
That makes sense because that movie scared me. The opening scene, I don't even remember bits and pieces of it, but like it
The one
scared
with
me.
the coffin with the dad, like they're bringing their dad down the coffin. He just zooms out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end the podcast on a slow fade out of Mouse Hunt. When the
Honestly,
dad in the
this
coffin is
this
just
makes so much
zooming
sense
out.
now that you're telling me
So,
that the guy that
as
directed
Williamson
The Ring.
and Craven intended for their hour 10 minutes, I'm assuming, Scream script analysis podcast, we were slowly fading out to the dad.
Can you just say the line?
Well, I'm assuming
first,
this last
the
like
book?
15, probably cut.
I need the closing line for this pod to be and that Billy stud bucket.
Not in my movie.